There has been an expectation that Sony is going to be increasing its prices with the pre-orders of Ghosts of Yotei going live. Two things have been proven. First of all, many toxic fanboys and haters have been silenced over the last few days as Sony PlayStation, at least for this year, seems to be sticking to their current pricing structure, which is a huge win for us gamers. And secondly, Ghosts of Yotei is absolutely dominating the gaming pre-order charts from around the world. We also have news of a single-player Naughty Dog game that's been cancelled, and a brand new unannounced Naughty Dog game in development has been for the last 3.5 years, not Intergalactic. It's something that's not been announced, so it sounds quite promising. And we also have updates on Half-Life 3 and the new Unreal Engine 6. Let's discuss this in more detail. Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. We have more gaming and PlayStation news, rumours and leaks to go over. As always, a fantastic shout out to the God of War and Uncharted channel members. And if you enjoyed today's video, ladies and gents, please show your support and your appreciation by hitting that like button. So considering all the things happening right now in gaming and how the narrative has turned quite negative with all these price hikes and talk of Sony PlayStation following Nintendo and Microsoft in raising the prices of their hardware and games, there is some really good news. We're talking about Ghosts of Yotei, one of the most anticipated PS5 games of the year. The big news is that the standard edition is priced at $70, £70. That might not sound like a big deal on the surface, but when you look at what's going on across the industry, it actually says quite a lot. Sony officially opened pre-orders for Ghosts of Yotei, and right off the mark, the response was massive. Within hours, Ghosts of Yotei shot up to the top of the PlayStation Store charts in both the US, the UK, and is dominating in several other countries around the world too. Ghosts of Yotei is the #1 most pre-ordered release on PlayStation storefront. What a fantastic achievement for Ghosts of Yotei. This kind of early success isn't unheard of for major exclusives, but it's still impressive. It just shows how much hype has been building for this game. Now here's where things get a little bit more interesting. The standard edition of the game is holding steady at £70, $70, which has been Sony's baseline price for the first-party PS5 titles since the launch of the console. But over the past few months, as I mentioned earlier, both Nintendo and now recently Microsoft have announced that their major releases are going up to $80 starting later this year and beyond. Nintendo's price jump starts in June with the release of the Switch 2, and Xbox will follow during the holiday season of 2025. With those changes, many players were expecting Sony to follow suit, especially for a major release like Ghost of Yotei, which is releasing towards the back end of the year. So it would fall in line with the changes at Nintendo and Microsoft. So when the $70 and £70 price tag dropped, a lot of fans actually felt relieved. One player summed it up perfectly and says, "I'm glad it's $70 instead of $80. I hope Sony holds out on increasing their game prices." Others echoed that same sentiment, happy that they wouldn't have to shell out more on games just yet. But not everyone is convinced that this will last. Some fans are already predicting that Sony is simply delaying the inevitable. Comments like, "The Sony game after this will go up to $80. And they'll 100% fumble this easy win," are popping up in some forums and social media. However, the $70, £70 price point right now feels like a small win, and in today's gaming economy, even small wins are worth celebrating. Now, the deluxe edition, which is selling for $80, £80, is actually trending even better than the standard one. Even though it's more expensive, it's leading the charts, so people are actually going out there and spending $80 on this game. And what do you get for the extra $10 or £10? Well, some exclusive in-game cosmetics like the snake armor set and a unique dye for your character, amongst other things. And for many players, those extras are worth the added cost, especially if you're a fan of personalization or just want the complete experience on day one. But here's something else that's been flying under the radar, and it deserves to be addressed. There's been a growing amount of noise from certain parts of the gaming community, and let's just call it what it is. It's toxic fanboys. These are the people who seem almost eager for Sony to raise their prices. Why? Well, some of them argue that increasing the price would reflect higher production values and help developers, but let's be real, a lot of this toxicity isn't coming from a place of genuine concern. It's more about defending corporate decisions, fueling console wars, or pushing agendas that make their preferred brand look more superior. This kind of mindset isn't really helping anyone. Gamers are already facing rising costs from hardware and online subscriptions to microtransactions and collector's editions. So when a company doesn't raise prices, that should be seen as a win for players, not something to mock or manipulate for internet clout. At the end of the day, the price of Ghost of Yotei staying at £70, $70 just doesn't affect Sony fans. It sends a message across the entire industry. It says even with inflation and development costs rising, there's still a balance to be struck between profitability and accessibility. We don't know what Sony's long-term plans are, and to be honest, a price increase could still happen and probably is very likely next year. But for now, it's good to see at least one major publisher holding the line. It's one less barrier for fans who just want to enjoy a new game without feeling ripped off by overly priced and incomplete games. Although considering the game is being developed and released by Sony PlayStation first party, they are almost always perfect upon release and hardly ever have any major issues on launch. So it's great to see Sony stick to its guns for now on pricing, and we'll see what happens next year. Cannot wait for Ghost of Yotei to launch later this year. We have a lot of other games though to get through until then, but still something really to look forward to. Have you ordered Ghost of Yotei? And if you have, let me know in the comments which version of the game you've ordered. Let's move on. So earlier this year, Naughty Dog, the studio behind The Last of Us and Uncharted, reportedly cancelled a single player game that until now had never been officially announced. This bit of news comes from industry insider Daniel Rickman, and while it hasn't been publicly confirmed by the studio, it's been taken seriously by fans and journalists who follow these kinds of developments closely. Now, the game that got the axe had been in the works for just over a year. It started development shortly after Naughty Dog pulled the plug on The Last of Us Online, the multiplayer spin-off that was supposed to expand on the series in a live service format. But after receiving internal feedback, reportedly from Bungie, the studio behind Destiny and Marathon, Naughty Dog realized that the demands of running a live service title didn't live up with their creative direction. They basically didn't want to turn the studio into a live service studio and support that one game for the next decade, which is practically what Bungie have been doing with Destiny. Naughty Dog decided not to head down that road, and in doing so, they also stepped away from this new single-player project that had barely gotten off the ground. One of the key developers tied to both of these efforts was a developer called Vinit Agarwal. He had a strong history with the studio, working on major hits like Uncharted 4: The Lost Legacy and The Last of Us Part 2. And after The Last of Us Online was shelved, he moved over to the new unannounced single-player project. Unfortunately, when that project got scrapped, Agarwal ended up leaving the company. But here's the thing, Naughty Dog isn't sitting idle. They're not sitting there doing nothing. Despite the cancellations, they still have another secret project in development. It's an unannounced game, but reportedly much further along. This one has been in production for about 3.5 years now, with Sean Escaig at the helm. Now, if you don't recognize that name, Escaig is a veteran at the studio. He was the lead cinematic animator for Uncharted 4 and The Last of Us, and even directed Uncharted: The Lost Legacy, so he's well renowned within the Naughty Dog studio. He did leave very briefly to work on Marvel's Avengers over at Crystal Dynamics, but he returned back to Naughty Dog in 2021. So you could argue that he's possibly been working on this game since 2021. That makes it around 4 years, give or take. And so he's now leading that project, though no details have been shared publicly. And on top of this unannounced game, we also have Intergalactic: The Heretic Prophet, Naughty Dog's big new sci-fi IP, announced at last year's Game Awards. That game is being directed by Neil Druckmann, the studio president and creator of The Last of Us. And Druckmann recently said that the game will explore themes of isolation and religion, a big shift from the usual Naughty Dog formula where characters typically have close allies around them. There's no official release date yet, but according to Bloomberg's Jason Schreier, we probably won't see it until sometime in 2027. That means we're looking at a PS5 launch first in 2027, followed by a PC version likely to follow maybe late 27 or early 2028. So very interesting to learn that Naughty Dog still have another unannounced big AAA game in development, and they're about 3.5 to 4 years in development. So we're looking at another year or two before that game is out. What do you think that new game could be? Is it a brand new IP? Is it The Last of Us Part 3? Is it a new Uncharted game? Let me know in the comments. And speaking of 2027, that year's been popping up in other major conversations. That's because it's been touted as a release window for next-gen consoles. Right now, Sony and Microsoft haven't said much about their next systems, the rumoured PS6 and the next-gen Xbox. But fans and insiders are starting to piece together a likely timeline. Based on previous console cycles, which tend to last around 7 years, a 2027 or a 2028 launch window makes the most sense, and some recent leaks might have added some fuel to that theory. For instance, there was a Blade Runner game in development at Supermassive Games, the studio behind Until Dawn, and that was reportedly targeting a 2026 release. That game has since been cancelled, but the fact that it was planned for the PS6 in 2027 has led many fans to speculate that the console is set for a release around that time. But not everyone is thrilled with the idea of a new console generation showing up so soon, especially when the current gen still feels like it hasn't really fully hit its stride. Many players have just recently come to terms with the $70, £70 price tag on big budget games. But now with both Nintendo and Microsoft confirming that they'll be raising the prices to $80, on top of that, prices going up for hardware, accessories and online services, people are feeling quite overwhelmed with these prices. A lot of gamers are actually hoping that Sony and Microsoft will wait a bit longer before launching the PS6 and whatever the next Xbox is, if there is the next Xbox. One Reddit user put it bluntly, and they go on to say, "I'd hope that Sony and Microsoft hold off for a couple of years at least. Everything is getting too expensive." Another person commented and added, "I don't think they'll delay it just because of prices, but I also don't think people are ready for another round of new hardware yet." Some players are already saying they won't even consider buying a PS6 or the next Xbox at launch. They'll just wait until the inevitable PS6 drops a few years later. This brings us to a bigger issue, and that's the growing tension between gamers and the industry's pricing model. And this is where Sony's recent move with Ghost of Yotei really stands out. As I mentioned earlier, unlike Nintendo and Microsoft, Sony has chosen not to raise the price of its base game for Ghost of Yotei. It's staying at $70, at least for the standard edition, despite the game launching in October 2025. And for a lot of players, that's a welcome surprise. In fact, it sparked a kind of collective sigh of relief across the PlayStation community. It suggests that for now, Sony isn't racing to jump on the $80 bandwagon. So what are your thoughts on a PlayStation 6 in development, and when do you think, realistically, when do you think people will be ready to accept a new PlayStation 6 or a new console generation? Personally, I think realistically, it'd be good if they pushed it back to 2029, something like that, right? 4 years, maybe even 2030, but I don't see that happening. Personally, I think the new console will arrive in 2028. But let me know your thoughts in the comments, and let's move on, because believe it or not, Half-Life 3 might actually be real this time, and Epic Games is already laying the foundation for Unreal Engine 6. Both of these things could change the industry in huge ways. So let's start with Half-Life 3. And you heard me correctly, I did say Half-Life 3. After years of rumours, memes and dashed hopes, it looks like Valve finally might be moving forward with the next chapter in the legendary series. And according to longtime Valve insider Tyler McVicker, a new Half-Life game codenamed HLX is not only in development, but it's actually in a playable state right from the start to the finish. That means it's gone beyond early prototypes or experimental phases. The team at Valve is reportedly playtesting the games intensely, trying to polish it and get the final pieces together. It's a major shift from past attempts to revive the Half-Life franchise. Over the years, there's been several internal projects, including one around 2013, 2014, that never really made it very far, often because they were built on unfinished technology or were far too ambitious for the time. One of those versions tried to combine procedurally generated content with Left 4 Dead style gameplay, but it was eventually cancelled because most of the Source 2 engine wasn't ready yet. But this time it seems different. McVicker says that this is the furthest a Half-Life 3 project has ever gotten. It's not just a proof of concept or a few cool mechanics, it's an actual game with a fully playable structure. And perhaps the most important thing for this game, it's not a VR title. That should be a relief to fans who want a more traditional experience like Half-Life 2, rather than a VR-focused sequel like Half-Life Alyx. One interesting twist is how the new Half-Life game handles gameplay variety. There's been a lot of discussion and discourse around procedural generation, and McVicker has tried to clear that up. He says it's not about randomly generating story elements or environments within the game. Instead, it's more about dynamically changing things like where enemies appear, where doors open, or where items are placed within the game, kind of like how AI Director worked in Left 4 Dead, but more advanced. And while he didn't go deep into story mechanics or story spoilers, McVicker hinted that characters from other Valve games might appear, including Chell or Shell, the silent protagonist from the Portal series. He also mentioned that writer Eric Woolpower is really pushing to make Portal 3 a reality, though that might come after the current Half-Life project wraps up. And if the rumours are true, Valve could announce Half-Life 3 or whatever HLX ends up being called as early as this summer at the Summer Game Fest, with a release date possibly landing by the end of 2025, which seems really ambitious, if I'm honest with you. That would put us on track for a huge return to one of the most iconic franchises in gaming history, nearly 20 years after Half-Life 2. Very exciting indeed if this happens to land this year, even though it sounds really optimistic. I'm saying 2026 to be on the safe side with Half-Life 3. Perhaps some kind of a trailer, a reveal of some kind this year, but 2026 seems the safest option. But what do you reckon? Let me know in the comments. So Epic Games, the company behind Fortnite and Unreal Engine, is already looking ahead to the next big leap in engine development, and that's with the Unreal Engine 6. In a recent interview on the Lex Fridman podcast, Epic's president Tim Sweeney spoke in depth about the current state of Unreal Engine and where it's going. According to Sweeney, Unreal Engine 6 is still a few years out, but it's going to bring together all the fragmented pieces that currently exist between game development and the tools used to build Fortnite content. Right now, Epic has different versions of Unreal Engine 5 running in parallel, one for traditional game developers and the other that powers the Fortnite ecosystem. Not all the features are shared between the two, which makes development a little bit messy. Unreal Engine 6 is expected to unify all of this under one roof, streamlining the tech so that developers, both big studios and indie creators, can all use the same powerful tools. But one of the biggest issues Epic wants to fix is how the engine handles game simulation. Sweeney admitted that Unreal Engine currently runs most of its game's logic on a single CPU core, even on machines with multiple cores. That's a huge limitation in today's world where most modern gaming PCs and consoles will have multi-core CPUs that are not being fully utilized. The reason for this, he explained, is that single-threaded programming is way easier to work with, not just for Epic's internal teams, but also for developers using the engine. But as games get bigger and more complex, that approach is holding things back. Epic is now working on building full support for multi-threaded simulation into Unreal Engine 6. This could unlock a massive jump in performance, reduced CPU bottlenecks, and make large, detailed worlds run more smoothly. Sweeney was careful not to promise any release dates though, but he did say that early versions of Unreal Engine 6 could start showing up in 2 to 3 years' time. Based on how long it took for Unreal Engine 5 to go from preview to full release and then into actual games, we might not actually see Unreal Engine 6 in finished and polished products until around 2028 or 2029. And to give you some context, Unreal Engine 5 was first previewed in 2020 with a wider release in early 2022. The first big games to use it didn't really land until mid to late 2023, with titles like Remnant 2, Lords of the Fallen, and Immortals of Avium. So in the long run, Unreal Engine 6 might not be powering your favorite games for another few years, but the work Epic is doing now could be laying the groundwork for the next decade of gaming. Okay guys, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. What are your thoughts on the Unreal Engine 6? Do you prefer game development studios to use Unreal Engine, or would you prefer the studios to be using their own proprietary engine technology? Let me know your thoughts. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you on the next video.